The light shop final update. It turns out that the owner of the light shop has a tragic past, which began years ago when the building collapsed. The owner and his young daughter were buried under the rubble. Rescuers were slow to arrive, and the daughter's legs were immobilized by a boulder. The boss was too injured to change the situation. My daughter gently picked up the candy scattered on the ground and peeled off a piece and fed it to the boss. She said, "Eat this candy and get up, Dad." The boss tries to pull out a smile. He used to peel the candies for his daughter himself. If he stayed any longer, it would be like waiting for death. The boss touched his daughter's face as if to say goodbye. He crawls to the exit, his body on the verge of collapse, promising to find a way to get his daughter out of there. The boss stumbled into a strange alley. There was no light on in any of the houses, and no one answered his cries for help. He walked for a long time before he finally saw a ray of hope. It was the only light from the light shop at the end of the alley. She was a woman wearing sunglasses, and the moment she saw him, she said, "You're already too late." The boss begs in tears, but she doesn't budge. Sorrow turns to anger, and the owner picks up the lamp and smashes it. But the moment the shopkeeper took off her sunglasses, the light suddenly went out. His body froze in place, out of control. The shopkeeper took the lamp from the man's hand and put the sunglasses back on. Everything went back to normal. Seeing how persistent he was, she finally revealed the secret of the store. This is no ordinary light shop. Each lamp here symbolizes the owner's life. The light bulb that is close to the person's own light bulb will blink. If you don't find the corresponding light bulb, it means he's dead. I remember not long ago my daughter peeled a candy and fed it to the boss, saying that she would eat it and get up. But the boss was already dead at that time, and he thought of how much loneliness and fear his daughter had to go through alone in the ruins. The boss's heart ached with pain. Every dying person has to search for the light bulb with their own will, and no one can interfere. But perhaps the shopkeeper was touched by his love for his daughter, or perhaps she had been in this lifeless place for too long. So she got bored and offered to make a deal with him. Since then, the owner has taken over the light shop. People who have had unfortunate accidents and have not been able to live a full life continue to live their lives in this area. But there are also people who can't accept death and wander around the light shop. In short, this is the world after death. The old man who was always cold and tormented by the barking dog finally rushed out of the room once again. He looks like he's going to eat that barking dog alive. He followed the dog into the alley. Meanwhile, Surface World's ICU has a new nurse. Nurse Park, as her mentor, will familiarize her with the daily routine, such as organizing medical supplies and familiarizing her with each patient's condition and treatment status. In fact, there was another incident the day the bus crashed into the ocean. A hiker fell off a cliff while hiking, but the most serious problem in the mountains in the middle of the night was hypothermia. He was able to maintain his body temperature with the help of a search dog, so he didn't lose any signs of life. The dogs were trained to never leave his side once they found a search object. It alerts the searchers by barking constantly. The dog was also seriously injured that day and could not be revived. He chased the dog into the alley and finally saw the dog that had disturbed him so much that he couldn't rest. The dog was still smiling, even though its wounds were not yet healed. He remembers what happened that day in the mountains, and the search and rescue dog that was lying on top of him, trying to keep his body warm. He was so badly injured, but still insisted on accomplishing his mission. The dog seems to be always so loyal, it doesn't care where in the world it is, but it realizes that it has to continue its mission no matter where it is. He barked for Uncle to follow him. Haley's father called several times but never got the good news he was hoping for. At the time of the accident, her mother, Jenny, was holding Haley tightly in her arms, protecting her favorite daughter for the rest of her life. Although Haley did not avoid the impact of the fall, her body appeared to be unharmed and she appeared to be asleep. Haley was too scared to leave the house, and it was almost time for Jenny's funeral. She was running out of time and had no choice but to go to the light shop for Haley. Sally is saved by Helen's protection, but she is still in danger and has to rely on her own will. It turns out that Helen is trying to force Sally to go to the light shop so that she can find her own light bulb and return to the world. Helen wanted to force Sally to go to the light shop so that she could find her own light bulb and return to the world. The two of them snuggle together this time. Helen coaxed her to buy a light bulb to take home, and Sally was silent, tears welling up in her eyes. She seemed to know everything. One of the most important things to get used to in a hospital is saying goodbye, because every day the doctors and nurses pass by death. This place is like a boundary. The doctors are the ones who guard the boundaries, and the patients are the ones who stand outside of them. And while it takes will to step inside the boundaries, sometimes it takes the help of a mediator. For example, the man who was thrown into the ground by his creditors had hearing when he was dying. Nurse Park puts an earpiece on him and is able to guide him back to the right path. Seeing the light in Jackson's favorite basketball, he must have found its owner to cheer him up. The driver's funeral has been scheduled. After wandering around Inner World, he finally came across a basketball that didn't belong here. Following its lead, the driver found Jackson living in an alley. The alley seemed endless to him. No matter how many times he went down it, he came back to the same place. He had already given up. But the driver knelt down and said, "Come on, I'll get you out of here." The detective stroked the back of his head, which was missing blood. His life in surface world is not completely dead. But being a detective, he's skeptical about everything and doesn't want to accept the status quo. His boss asks him what his children's nicknames are after their tragic deaths. Spring, summer, hope, happiness, wish, love, or daylight. The children who come to this place are usually given these names. The detective saw his daughter nicknamed Daylight in the locker. Her death was just a change of world. That's the best consolation for the detective. The boss didn't want to tell him because people who come here can't leave with their memories, or they'll get confused between the two worlds. If you can't distinguish between space and time, you'll suffer from what they call delusions in the realm of representation. Now that the detective has found his own light with his will, he can go home. At that moment, the detective in the hospital bed reacted, and Nurse Park in the ICU contacted his attending physician in a flash. He finally woke up. Uncle followed the search dogs all the way to the light shop. The owner tried to open his mouth several times, but the dog interrupted him. The dog guided him to the light bulb. The driver stumbles out of the alley with Jackson on his back and learns from him that there is a woman living in the alley. Sally didn't know how long she had been walking. The driver's steps were heavy. By now, we can see the light shop in the camera, and the rest of the way is for Jackson to walk on his own. Before leaving, the driver stops him and tells him he's sorry because he caused the accident. Under the driver's watchful eye, Jackson walks into the light shop and touches the only light bulb that blinks for him. It was his light, and he could go home. And the Redeemer still lingers in the world. A man on a viaduct had a near miss trying to avoid a pedestrian. He stopped his car to look and saw that there was no one there at the barricade. After he left, the familiar voice rang out again. It's Jane, who's been doing this for Henry several times a day, sewing up Henry's wounds. But when he woke up, Henry still couldn't remember anything. Jane's compartment in the morgue is still inaccessible. She was running out of time, and her efforts seemed futile. Jane couldn't stand it any longer. She walked out on the highway and stopped the bus. She rushed up to Henry and asked why he didn't remember her. Was it because he didn't love her enough? Henry was at a loss for words. Jane, desperate, rips off his jacket to reveal a gaping wound around his waist. In Jane's heartbreaking cries, Henry gradually remembered what happened. He asked over and over again what he should do. Whether the tears fell from the guilt of not remembering his girlfriend for a while, or from the fear and regret of the tragic death. Did he really love Jane? The driver found Sally's house in the alley. The window was opened by Helen, who had stayed in the world forever. He apologized for being late, for knowing there was something wrong with the brakes, but choosing to go back to the office to save money on repairs, which ultimately led to an irreversible situation. Helen tells him that human beings are not immune to accidents, but that everyone is just unlucky, so he doesn't have to take all the blame on him. But he's the cause of all this, and he has to find closure in this world. The next person to leave is Haley, who lives in a nearby apartment. On the way, the driver meets Jenny, who is on her way to the light shop, where he falls to his knees and begs for forgiveness. Jenny, unable to speak with her mouth full of cotton, points out the building behind her and continues on her way. Jenny didn't stop for a second. She arrived at the light shop. The first thing she does is pull out Haley's lost chain. The owner recognized her as Haley's mother, but the light shop has strict rules. Even real family members can't be accommodated, and they have to find the light bulb themselves of their own free will. Jenny is desperate and grabs her boss by the collar. To deal with the restless spirits, the boss takes off his sunglasses and tries to deter them with his eyes. But when she saw the boss's face, Jenny froze. She couldn't speak or spit out cotton and kept patting her chest. Seeing that the boss still didn't understand her intention, Jenny took the candy wrapper from the box and put it in his hand, then pulled it to her mouth. She peeled off another candy and fed it to the boss. It was as if he suddenly realized that this woman was the most precious person in his life. She is his daughter, Jenny, whom he has longed for, and whom he has even risked imprisoning his own life in exchange for a light bulb to keep her safe. After not being able to wait for her mother for a long time, Haley cleaned up the pieces of the light bulb in her house. When she goes downstairs to take out the trash, she wonders why the aunt in the elevator can't see her. The driver, exhausted from climbing up the stairs outside the apartment, explains why Haley is here. She thought back to her life and wondered why she was always ignored by her teachers and never listened to by her friends. It's not that she's ostracized, it's that no one sees her at all. It's a place different from her life. And the only way back to the real world is the light shop. Jenny got Haley's light bulb from her boss, but she wouldn't take it with her hands clenched. Haley said, "I can't live with you. I want to live with you." How could a mother not want to? But she'd already felt the pain of losing a loved one once. The second time would undoubtedly make it worse, but a parent only wants one thing, for their child to be safe. So even if they are separated, even if they will never see each other again, as long as their child is safe, it is worth it. The moment the light appeared, the driver also closed his eyes. He had finally accomplished his mission. Sally and Helen hugged and said goodbye in their red heels. They had tears in their eyes, but they couldn't say anything. The road to the light shop was long, but the thought of being separated from the love of their life suddenly made it short. So short that we reached our destination in a blink of an eye. Sally enters the store and looks around, finding her light bulb without any trouble. Meanwhile, in reality, Sally was responding, but when the doctors checked her condition, the monitor let out a long, shrill beep. It's a world where people live, no matter where they are. It's the same as the real world, but it's also different. What's the point of living if you can't be with your lover if you go back to the real world? Sally let go of the light bulb gently and threw it away. The light bulb shattered, but those who love each other can stay together. With one last person left, Jane led Henry through the alley to the entrance of the light shop. They hugged one last time, and it was time for Henry to find his light. In his near-death state, Jane had been keeping Henry's will to live alive. So even when he entered the store, he didn't know what to look for. After circling the store several times to see a faintly flickering light bulb, he didn't hesitate to leave, leaving Jane to run up to him in tears. In the real face of the moment of parting, the old spontaneity would be gone, and after crying, one should try to accept it. He ran towards his own life. 3 months have passed. The victims of the accident have recovered and are ready to be discharged from the hospital. Most of them had forgotten their memories of inner world, but they still felt a warm feeling in their hearts. The owner of the light shop took in the rescue dog, and the delivery man brought in new light bulbs, but there was no telling if these would be residents or temporary visitors. Those who remain at inner world have lives of their own, and the driver keeps the buses running even more responsibly than before. Sally and Helen didn't have to deal with strange looks anymore. It was a better place to be. After Jenny's death, Haley was left with her father. Her classmates are very sympathetic to her, so they take care of her, and they are always eager to work with her on group assignments. But Haley had a secret that she didn't tell anyone. She wasn't treated for delusions when she was hospitalized, and she still remembers what happened at Inner World. Jenny from Inner World occasionally helps out at the light shop. Father. She and the dog are a family of 3. They try their best to keep the boundaries between the two worlds intact, but there are always times when things get messy. A girl in short sleeves was in front of Haley, and her short sleeves didn't fit in with the weather. Haley waved at her at Inner World, the first time anyone had ever seen her. So she followed Haley all the way to the real world. The detective went to the noodle shop after recovering. There's been a lot of paranormal rumors around here lately, so it must be Kim Sang-hoon's appearance. when the police were arresting Kim Sang-hoon, a car came speeding by, and it turned out that it was Kim Sang-hoon's body that saved the police's life. It was Kim Sang-hoon who saved the detective's life by protecting him with his body. Kim Sang-hoon's eyes show that he's the same kind of person as the light shop owner. He also has the added job of bringing people who don't belong in surface world back to inner world. Kang Min, who was killed in the arson case, is the one he's been after. As for the old man, Kim Sang-hoon felt sorry for him because he lived alone and had a limp. Because the old man had been starving for a long time, he thought he'd treat him to a bowl of noodles and take him away. But I don't mean leaving, I mean living well in the world. The detective's eyes are really different and observant, and he can see things that other people can't see. Kim Sang-hoon asks him if he'd like to take over his job, but it's a very difficult job with a lot of open cases. But isn't that what the detective has been doing all along? Nurse Park was returning to work at the hospital when she encountered a fierce man. He's the truck driver who was playing with his cell phone when the bus collided with him. With all the patients being rushed to the ICU that day, the trucker's family insisted that Nurse Park treat his body first, but was refused. Nurse Park is the first person he thinks of to take revenge on after he passes away. It's time for the detective who handles unfinished cases to make an appearance. Henry was not recovering well, and even with the delusion therapy, he was still feeling very confused. He doesn't even remember that Jane is dead. Doctors advised him to change his environment and clean up what he had to, and the first thing he threw away was his cell phone, which held fond memories of Jane. He seems more concerned about his inability to live a normal life than Jane's departure. The Undertaker is ready for Jane to go where she belongs, but she still has an obsession with why Henry can't remember her. She is sad and frustrated, but a spirit with an obsession can never leave. You can't leave. Henry got a new cell phone that day, and his colleagues were clamoring to prepare a celebration party for him. When he got back to his new apartment, the sensor light in the hallway went out. He waved his hand like he waved at Jane when he was in love with her, and Jane came back to him. The man who betrayed his true heart had to swallow 10,000 needles, and Jane took revenge on her with a vengeance. Compared to the other version of Light Shop, this version is very close to the original. I don't know why there's such a big difference between the two versions, even though both are written by Kang Choi. In terms of timeline and the story of each character, this version is very close to the original manga. The beginning looks scary, but in fact the theme is warm. The storyline will be very confusing, but this is also the original masterpiece. I was in tears by the end of the book. I cried once when I watched the manga, but I didn't expect to cry again when I watched this episode. Not only Light Shop, but I Love You, Moving, and Neighborhood have all been remade into dramas and movies by original comic book artist Ginger Grass. As the story is good, the remake will not be bad either. Kanko is a popular comic book artist on the internet, and he deserves to be called that.